Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really thought-provoking idea from a piece you shared with us. We're going to dive into what the author calls democratic schizophrenia.
Hmm.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Imagine a society where what people believe to be true, this kind of self-constructed reality, it becomes so powerful it actually overshadows the actual reality.
Right, like a societal level disconnect, a clash between the imagined and the real.
Exactly. And the really significant point the author makes is when this imagined reality gets, widespread acceptance, that's when it can potentially lead to serious problems.
And what's fascinating right at the start is the allegory the author uses. This story of Çîçekê's family from Urfa.
Ah, yes. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a tragic story, maybe folklore, maybe based on truth, but it's incredibly insightful. This young woman, Çîçekê, she becomes completely consumed by this vision she has.
A vision?
Yeah, of a disastrous future for her unborn children, even her grandchildren. A future, and this is crucial, that never actually happens.
But she believes it will.
Absolutely. Her belief is total.
Mm.
And it paralyzes her,
Okay.
and eventually it paralyzes her entire family. They get so fixated on these potential bad outcomes.
That they can't function.
Exactly. They lose the ability to act in their present reality. And it ultimately leads to their demise.
Wow.
Yeah, and the story even created an idiom, wiki mala Çîçekê, like Çîçekê's family.
Yeah.
People use it to describe someone who's just completely incapacitated by worrying about things that might go wrong.
That's a powerful image, isn't it? Self-inflicted paralysis based on something that's only in their minds.
It really is.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The author then draws a direct line from this allegory right to the situation of the Kurds in northern Kurdistan. The argument is that at various points in history, the Kurds have also been, let's say, susceptible to the same kind of detachment from their actual, tangible reality. They've embraced secondary, imagined realities instead.
So democratic schizophrenia here is like a society kind of
Yeah.
collectively living in a bubble of its own making.
That's a good way to put it, where what they believe becomes more powerful or at least more immediate than what's actually happening around them.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we absolutely have to consider the historical context the author lays out. It's the backdrop for everything.
Right. The Kurds as a people divided.
Exactly. Divided by multiple state borders, lacking clear political status historically, facing denial of their identity, severe language restrictions,
Forced displaced.
forced displacement, suppression of dissent, constant pressure to assimilate, and the exploitation of their resources. It's this complex and often oppressive history that sets the stage.
The stage for these second realities to emerge as the author sees it.
Yes, that's the argument.
So keeping that difficult history in mind, let's dive into some specific examples the author gives of Kurds adopting these second realities. The first one really struck me.
Which one was that?
We're talking about Kurds whose own parents might not have even spoken Turkish, yet their children chose to identify as Turkish?
Wow. Actively constructing a different identity.
Yeah. Essentially fabricating a Turkish history for their families, cutting themselves off from their Kurdish roots. The author even mentions an article by Mukahit Bilici about a man named Kamcha Shafi and his, intense love for Turkey as an example.
That's quite something. It really highlights that internal conflict, doesn't it? The lengths people might go to align with the dominant narrative.
Why do you think that happens? Is it about belonging, security?
It could be a mix of things. A desire for belonging, certainly. Maybe seeking security within the existing system. Or even, sadly, sometimes an internalized sense of inferiority that can come from that kind of prolonged oppression.
Another example the text explores is Kurdish Islamists.
Right. Those who, in principle, oppose creating an independent Kurdistan.
Why? What was their reasoning, according to the author?
Well, the reasoning given was to avoid dividing the Islamic Ummah, the global Muslim community.
Okay, but the author points out.
Right. The author points out pretty directly that there are already, 63 Muslim states in the world?
So it raises questions about selective logic, doesn't it?
It does. The desire for religious unity is understandable, of course. But the author questions prioritizing that specific unity over Kurdish national aspirations, especially given all the other existing nations.
Then there were the Kurds committed to internationalist communism or socialism.
Yeah, even after those systems largely collapsed elsewhere. Still holding on to the idea, the anticipation of a global working-class revolution as the main goal.
It shows the power of ideology, I suppose.
Definitely. How belief systems can persist, even when facing, major real-world shifts, the author suggests they remained attached to the theory, maybe overshadowing more immediate concerns about their own national situation.
Okay, now let's shift focus. The author seems to see the PKK and its leader, Abdullah Öcalan, as a particularly significant example of this whole phenomenon.
Yes, that's a major part of the analysis.
And it's important, as the source says, to remember their initial goal back in the 70s was clear: an independent Kurdistan. And they built significant support around that.
Absolutely. That was the starting point, a clear national goal. But the author argues a major ideological shift happened after Öcalan's capture in 1999.
Right, after 99, and that's when this explosion of new concepts happened.
Exactly. The author contends the ideology transformed, marked by introducing a huge number of new terms.
And the language itself is key here. Lots of terms starting with democratic or ending with sal in Turkish style.
That's right. And what's interesting is the sheer volume of these terms. And according to the author, they're often unclear intellectual or political grounding. The text lists them out, and it's quite a list.
Let's hear some.
Okay. Democratic Republic, Democratic Confederalism, Democratic Federation, Democratic Autonomy, Democratic Liberation, Democratic Ecology, Democratic Society, Democratic Gender Egalitarianism, Democratic Middle East, Democratic Islam. Goes on.
Democratic Constitution, Democratic Modernity, Democratic Nation.
Democratic Movement, People's Democratic Movement, Democratic Participation, Democratic Quantum. Yes, all of those. Democratic Equality, Path, Solution, Politics, Change, Front, Turkey, Uprising, Framework, Socialism, Will, Woman.
Okay, that is a lot.
It is. And the author's central point is that many of these terms lack clear, established equivalents. They create, in his view, a kind of world of meaning that becomes detached.
Detached from the actual reality of the Kurds.
That's the argument, detached from their core concerns. The analysis even brings up concepts like aphasia, loss of speech, and specifically sabedilmis toplumsal aphasia.
Which means?
Roughly, induced social aphasia, like a socially engineered loss of clear expression.
So the idea is this flood of vague terms might actually hinder clear thinking, create a sort of linguistic fog.
That seems to be the suggestion, making it harder to articulate and address concrete needs and aspirations.
Okay. The author then tries to summarize Öcalan's actual proposals based on his writings. What does that look like?
Well, this is where the departure from the initial goal of independence becomes really clear. The analysis outlines these key ideas.
Go on.
First, nation-states are presented as outdated. So Kurds should abandon seeking their own state.
Okay.
Second, existing Middle Eastern borders, they should largely stay, but maybe border crossings get liberalized somehow.
What else?
Third, a Kurdish state, even a democratic one, is seen as undesirable. Instead, the states where Kurds currently live, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Syria, they should become democratic.
Interesting distinction.
Very. And the author highlights the argument made. Establishing a Kurdish state means bloodshed, but Palestine, in the same framework, is seen as deserving independence.
A contradiction.
The author certainly presents it as one. Also, the idea that Kurds should demand language rights from Turkey, but should just create the conditions themselves.
How practical is that?
That's the question raised. And finally, this broader vision. The Middle East unifying, maybe like the EU, into a confederation, with Kurds participating within their current state borders.
That is a significant shift from independence.
Absolutely. And the author is clearly skeptical, even challenging others to offer a different interpretation of these writings, saying they'll write a rebuttal if convinced otherwise.
That openness does underscore how contested this ideological change is.
Definitely.
And this brings us to a really critical question the author poses. Do non-Kurds actually buy into this democratic story, especially in the context of the Middle East?
Right. With all its existing states, diverse groups, entities like ISIS, would they find this vision of democratic confederalism compelling or even understandable?
The author also asks about the Turkish left, questioning how many can ethically discuss the Kurdish issue honestly.
It's a pointed question. And the skepticism deepens when the author notes that even the original simpler goal of independent Kurdistan only got about 45% Kurdish support over 30 years.
So the logical follow-up is,
how many Kurds would accept not demanding anything in terms of self-determination? It all circles back to, do these new, complex proposals connect to the real lives and hopes of people on the ground?
it sounds like a pretty direct challenge to the relevance of the new direction.
It is. While acknowledging some intellectual interest in Öcalan's theories, the author concludes they fail to address the Kurds' real, pressing problems and don't seem realistically implementable anytime soon.
The analogy used is powerful.
The starving person being offered descriptions of a feast in paradise.
Exactly. Intellectually interesting, maybe, but useless for the immediate desperate need. Hunger, in this case.
Or, as the author adds, the futility of theory when facing real violence, like attacks on Kirkuk or Kobani. Abstract ideas don't stop bullets.
Now, the author anticipates a counterargument. Maybe this shift is strategic, a form of takiye.
Yes, dissimulation, calculated ambiguity, maybe for the sake of the Rojava Revolution in Syria.
But the author rejects that.
Strongly, using the metaphor of a glass Trojan horse.
Glass, meaning.
Meaning it's too fragile, too transparent. It won't work to infiltrate the fortress of existing power structures. And worse, the author believes the consequences will ultimately harm the Kurdish people.
The analysis also points to changing symbols.
Yes, observing things like the former flag of the occupiers, as the author terms them, now being worn as a pin by Kurdish politicians.
Prompting a call to reevaluate this path, this apparent Turkification.
It's presented as a stark visual symbol of changing priorities.
Which brings us back to the core question, what is the fundamental problem of the Kurds in Kurdistan?
The author hammers this home. The historical reality of a homeland divided by treaties in the 1920s, a body still exploited.
And how do the new proposals address that reality?
That's the challenge. The author questions their relevance, highlighting the paradox of opposing South Kurdistan's independence based on this new ideology.
The analogy there was
prescribing a hair loss pill to someone with amputated limbs needing urgent pain relief. The solution just doesn't match the critical problem.
Wow. And the conclusion uses another strong analogy.
Yes, about those who set out to become Buddha to achieve enlightenment, but near the end, choose to become fools instead.
And the author argues this isn't just personal choice, given the cost.
Exactly. Not after 50,000 deaths, thousands of destroyed villages, millions displaced. The end point of that kind of struggle, the author believes, shouldn't be reconciling with occupiers and integrating into their system.
Effectively agreeing to the absence of Kurdistan.
That's the stark conclusion drawn.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, the central tension presented is this potential for societal self-deception, this detachment from reality.
Right. Using the Kurdish experience as a complex and often tragic case study of how a second reality can take hold and potentially divert a group from its core issues.
And the author's final thought, slightly ironic.
Yes, considering global shifts and the potential for statehood, the author says, while unsure if it solves everything, they still desire a, what was it? A democratic, ecological, gender liberationist eggplant kebab for their people.
A touch of grounding reality mixed with the grand concepts.
Exactly. A bit humorous, but poignant.
So, the author leaves you with a provocative question to think about.
Indeed. In this world saturated with information, with competing narratives everywhere, how do individuals, how do communities stay grounded in their core realities?
How do we avoid that trap of collectively building and believing in potentially harmful second realities?
It really asks you to reflect on the Çîçekê allegory. It's lessons about the dangers of losing sight of the real world. They seem pretty timeless, don't they?